Story, really, aren't they? Flo's with us on set as ever.
That's right. Let's start with the L'Orient Le Jour, the Lebanese paper, that says that there's a horrible sense of déjà vu. And if we take a look at the front page today, they talk about how the world is taking big steps into the Cold War, so back in time. Now, Chapat, the cartoonist in the International New York Times, also has a blast from the past. You can see Putin here barreling down on Ukraine, blasting the Beatles song back in the USSR from those little speakers there.
And a lot of papers focusing on what on earth the West should do, what our reaction should be to all of this.
That's right. There are a lot of musical references in the press today. Let's take a look at the front page of The Independent that talks about how do you solve a problem like Crimea. It doesn't seem like it's very appropriate, but The Independent is very pessimistic today. It says, so far there seems to be no end in sight to this grave crisis. The Wall Street Journal is also pretty pessimistic today. This is their front page. They're talking about how the West is limited in cowing Putin. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal, it's the EU's economic ties with Russia that really complicate any bid to punish Moscow. Analysts say basically that Russia is too big and too intertwined with the West to be able to isolate it. And sanctions could cause major economic damage to both countries across a wide range of sectors, being financial and, of course, the energy sector.
Now, Flo's also been reading a piece from the International New York Times, taking a closer look at the central role that energy could play in the crisis. Share it with us.
That's right. The International New York Times says that gas is emerging as the strategic lever in this crisis. Basically, the International New York Times says that natural gas is both the strongest glue that binds Russia and Ukraine, but also the largest vulnerability for both nations. It actually likens it to a gun held to each other's head. And that's why natural gas is so critical in this Ukraine crisis. And this article says that the U.S. really wants to minimize the dependence that the Ukraine and Europe actually have on Russia, because this gives Russia a lot of influence. And this article says that the U.S. is actually trying to maybe take a chapter from Russia's book and wants to export more to Europe, export more gas to Europe, and basically, therefore, use energy as a tool for foreign policy. Now, it's interesting to note that China is also chiming in on this Ukraine crisis, and I pulled out the editorial from the China Daily. It's the first time they're really commenting on Russia flexing its military muscle, and the gist of it is, can't everybody just get along? Basically, it says that the U.S. and European countries really have to work with and not against Russia.
Now, a lot of papers also commenting on how the Ukraine crisis, this is surprising to me anyway, is casting a bit of a shade over the Middle East peace process. What on earth has that got to do with the Middle East peace process?
Well, you have Benjamin Netanyahu. He's in the U.S. Holding talks with Barack Obama. And this is an article also in the International New York Times that says that Ukraine is snarling the Middle East effort. Now, on top of just overshadowing his actual visit, this article says that the Ukraine crisis really threatens American policies throughout the Middle East, because basically the standoff with Russia could complicate efforts to curb Iran's nuclear program, to try to put a stop to Syria's civil war, and to broker a peace deal between Israel and Palestinians. Now, The Independent is also focusing on this potential peace deal. It's not very hopeful. It says that not in our time, for instance. It says that this deadline that's looming, well, chances of it actually achieving anything are very slim. It says that this is due to a lack of goodwill on all sides.
And in social news today, the newspapers, they've been reacting to the results of a report which is about violence against women. This is in the EU, just here, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a very interesting report, and it's interesting to note that it comes out just a couple of days before World Women's Day. Now, let's look at an article in The Guardian. You can see here it says that the extent of this violence is revealed, and the scale is really astounding. 1/3 of women, for instance, say they've suffered from physical or sexual violence since the age of 15. 55% say they've suffered from sexual harassment since the age of 15. So according to The Independent and their editorial, they say this is very depressing and really shames modern Europe.
And I'm going to annoy the producer by squeezing this one in. Finally, Slate reporting about the New York Times correcting a spelling mistake 161 years later.
That's right. This week, the New York Times published a correction for an article that was written on January 20th, 1853. Now, this was an article about Solomon Northup. He's the memoir. His memoir served as a base for the Oscar-winning film, The 12 Years a Slave. Basically, the New York Times misspelled his name back then, and so they issued a correction this week.
How sweet. You see, it was worth getting in. Coming up, Ukraine, and Rob Parsons, our our chief foreign editor, is there. He'll be talking to us about the latest situation there. Plus, a year since Venezuela lost Hugo Chavez amid the violence. We report in focus on those for and against Nicolas Maduro and find, whilst his popularity has plummeted, he still has large-scale support.